The European Union was born from the ashes of two world wars that had divided the European continent. European leaders, they saw stronger economic and social integration as a way to compete in a world that was increasingly dominated by the US and China. But after 6 decades of global integration, Western nations are turning inwards, it would seem. Does UK's exit from the European Union mark the resurgence of the nation state? And more importantly, does it indicate the end of the age of globalization? Joining us this evening on this discussion is Fredrik Eriksson, Director at the European Centre for International Political Economy. Also, Shaurya Doval joins us. He's Director at India Foundation. And DK Pant is Chief Economist and Senior Director at India Ratings. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us this evening. My first question to you, Fredrik Eriksson. This Brexit vote, is it a rejection of globalization, you think?
No, I don't think it's a rejection of globalization. It's sort of the opinion behind it comes with, I'd say, fairly strong support for trade, for foreign direct investments, for tourists crossing borders to other parts of the world. I think it may be a rejection of globalization in the sense that an increasingly integrated world will, of course, also have consequences for sovereignty, for the capacity of one government to make its own decisions. And what we saw in the campaign was, of course, a rejection of the idea to pool sovereignty between the UK and the European Union. And we saw a rejection of the idea that Britain should be an economy and a country which is open and welcoming to immigrants in the same way it's been in the past. So in that sense, it's maybe sort of a rejection of globalization, but it's not a rejection of trade, investment, etc.
Certainly. So I was talking about the larger concept. Shaurya Doval, how are you reading Brexit? Does the outcome of the Brexit vote raise fundamental questions, you think, on the whole concept of globalization as we know it, on the free movement of people, of capitals and of goods that we are hearing from Fredrik Eriksson?
I would tend to agree with Fredrik that globalization, at least in my view, is a much more fundamental concept. It is driven by far more fundamental factors in today's world. Things like technology, the internet, global connectivity, some of the on the positive side. On the negative side, globalization is affected by things like global terrorism, diseases that come with it. So globalization today is a fundamental phenomenon driven by more fundamental forces underlying it. In context of that, I think Brexit is at best a blip. It is neither a validation of or against globalization. It's a blip that has been caused by certain domestic factors, coupled with, as Fredrik mentioned, certain angst of people against issues and greater autonomies to their governments. Yeah. So we have to understand it in that context. I don't think we can take one result and extrapolate it and say that it's the end of globalization.
You know, the reason why we're talking about it is because of the possibility that exists, and a lot of people are talking about cataclysmic changes as well. So you could well refer to it as a blip, but there is also the possibility that this could be a contagion. DK Pant, do come in on this. Do you think the Brexit vote was actually a vote on globalization? Will this effectively put the brakes on open trade and immigration policies, which are the real hallmarks of world growth?
Well, I tend to agree with other two panelists. I see it as more a problem which has occurred mainly because of the kind of unemployment or employment situation in the Europe, or especially in UK. So I also agree with other two panelists, like this is not a vote against, or this is not end to globalization. If you have heard the yesterday House of Commons debate and the member of parliament after member of parliament was asking question to David Cameron and saying, look, whatever you had done, we agree with it because it's the people's choice, people's opinion, but make sure when UK leaves EU, all our trade interest, all interest of our investment coming in, and the people moving across boundaries, and the investment coming in, UK's role in the global economy and global politics, there is no impact on that. While UK decides to leave, Scotland
Yes.
is thinking about how, though there will be Brexit, but Scotland be remains in EU.
Exactly.
So you have the forces from both the side, where, but even if you, I'll take it further. Like if you look at any U.S. election, presidential election, you listen the noises about the people have shipped job to India and China.
Right.
But election after election, that becomes a point of debate, but nothing happens after that.
Sure. So you're
Because
thinking this is political grandstanding. It doesn't really account for major shifts, no tectonic shifts in the world economy, as it were. Frederick Eriksson, do highlight this because, like DK Pant is also pointing out, the Scots, they've overwhelmingly voted for remaining in the European Union. And if this means breaking away from Britain, so be it, they say. So this could be a huge trigger, don't you think, for other such secession moves within the European Union? It could fundamentally change political and economic structures as we see it, or is that too dire a consequence that we're thinking about here?
Well, I think it's far too early to sort of make any predictions about the future, both of Scotland and of other regions in other countries in Europe that have similar sentiments of wanting to depart from their countries. I'm not even sure that Britain, at the end of the day, is going to leave the European Union. I think there are far too many uncertainties around right now, and we can easily see how exit negotiations with the EU is something that is going to drag on for many, many years. This is something we're going to talk about still in 5 years, is my expectation. And there are a lot of things that can happen during that particular period that is going to change the political conditions for the UK, in the sense that they may not be willing to leave. If it does leave and Scotland activates a new referendum on its membership of the United Kingdom, I'm not so sure that they are going to find other countries in Europe that are going to be very welcoming, because we have, for instance, the Spanish government, which is fighting against the local Catalan government.
Yes.
About breaking away from Spain. We have, even in Belgium, we have the Flemish part, which has sort of a long-term, not very active.
We seem to have an audio issue over there. We'll try and resolve that. Shaurya Doval, I want to take it to you, because these nationalistic undercurrents that we are seeing, that seems to be at the root of this entire debate that we are having. Whether a vote on whether Britain stays in the EU or not, does it merit this larger discussion on globalization at this point in time? All three of you seem to be in unison saying that it's too early a call. We'll have to wait for the outcome. But that's exactly my question to you. Do we have to wait for the entire outcome to play out? And like we're hearing from Frederick as well, he's saying that, look, I mean, at this point in time, we don't even know whether the UK is actually going to exit the EU or not. This is a debate that we're still going to have 5 years from now, because all the modalities, everything will have to be chalked out. It's not going to be very easy. But the outcome of this is going to be very crucial to watch, because this is what is something that is going to decide whether or not this inward-looking kind of culture, moving away from the globalization approach that we've had in such a long time, post-World War, is something that we can live with.
So there are two things that you are in your question.
Yes.
There are two dimensions to your question. One is that is this globalization debate, does the Brexit vote add anything or subtract anything from the globalization debate? I think and the second part to your question is that what are the implications of this? Let me answer the second part. As the earlier panelist said, it's too early to talk about it. We don't know whether this will go through or this will not go through. If it goes through, what will be the form it will finally take, and all the questions about the modalities of this are unanswered. So anything that we talk about at this stage will be outright speculation, because it seems that nobody knows at this point in time.
Yes.
So that's sort of, and I look at that as more as a tactical thing. Something which is contemporary, it will sort itself out. There are smart people involved. Nobody wants this order to collapse. So something rational will come out of this. But there is another question that you asked, which is the earlier dimension, that what does this vote tell us about the globalization debate? Well, first we've got to look at the fact that in the UK, 52% of the people voted for Brexit, and about 48% voted to stay in, which was and that was all about 75%. So it wasn't really an overwhelming majority of the United Kingdom that actually voted out of the EU. We have to keep these figures in context as we extrapolate them about the globalization debate. As the earlier panelists mentioned, globalization is a phenomenon that is driven by certain fundamental factors, and whether we like it or not, it is here to stay. That globalization will impact different countries and different sections within countries in different ways. As those outcomes of those impacts become clearer or become more visible, societies and countries will react in different ways.
Sure.
They will react like what we saw 2 days ago, in a knee-jerk reaction where they don't know what the future holds, but at this moment a certain section of the society is feeling very victimized,
yes,
or is not feeling the benefits of globalization come
exactly
to them. So they are actually looking at an inward-looking view. And that's very natural to understand. And I think as these implications play themselves out in societies,
yes,
mature societies, democratic societies will put them to debate, and finally the dust will settle in a manner which I think will be good for everybody.
Right.
Because even if there is no divine ordained that globalization
sure,
is indeed good, globalization will have to be studied and understood as it unfolds itself.
Right.
And what I look at, that what is happening in Britain is really a manifestation of that debate, where two sections of society are actually debating it out as to what kind of globalization they want. And to add to that, as the last speaker said, nobody is talking against globalization.
No.
All that they are talking about is what kind of globalization they want.
Right.
So is this
the friction that we see in defining what globalization really stands for, Frederick Erickson? Is that where it is? Because there seems to be, at this point in time at least, when we are debating the implications of a Brexit on where we've gone wrong on the globalization thrust, there is a strong notion that globalization hasn't meant global equity as envisaged. In fact, quite the contrary over there. The belief is that it has favored only the elite. In fact, an analysis of the voting patterns in the referendum is suggesting that the strongest support for Brexit has come from those parts of Britain that had been poor for a long stretch of time. So there are sociological factors to speak of that seem to be rooted in this deep sense of entrenched national geographical inequality. Is that where this debate is? Frederick?
Well, partly. I mean, I don't think you can make sort of very simplistic correlations between sort of people that have been exposed to globalization and voting in one particular direction or not. For instance, when you look at the voting pattern in the UK, the constituencies that are most exposed to trade and trade with Europe in particular were the ones that voted the most to leave. So likewise, looking at the pattern of wealth and income per capita in different constituencies, you're not seeing a general trend, which is that it's poor regions that are voting against the EU. It was also very affluent regions that voted against the EU. The northern English part of the country, which voted to leave, they were exposed to a type of globalization that were around in the 1970s and the 1980s, when coal mines and commodity producers in the UK had a difficult period of time, but they haven't been that much exposed to globalization over the past. But what I think it's important to say, however, is that the combined factors of globalization, technological change, and difference in education and educational patterns within inside countries has increased
yes,
income inequalities in the Western world for 20, 30, perhaps even a longer period than that.
Sure.
And we're not really seeing that type of factors going away. We're probably going to see an acceleration of the role that these factors play for driving up
Right. You know, on that note, since there is again that audio issue that's cropping up, we'll take a very quick break. We'll fix that. And of course, we'll turn that debate, because for an economy like India at this point in time, since there is the whole question of globalization, we are indeed opening up our doors for more FDI to the world to come and do business with us. What are the real implications really? Is there going to be a redefinition, or are nationalistic the ideas that are coming in on that front, the right-wing kind of ideas, are they going to play a bigger role in the new definition, as it were, of globalization? That's something else we are bringing up on the other side of a break. Do stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back. We're still discussing Brexit. Are there larger implications over here when you talk about globalization? DK Pant, I want to ask you this. The timing of this debate on the future of globalization, of a more inward-looking world environment, it's coming at a time when world trade and economic growth have slowed down. I want to ask you, is there a sense that the system of open borders, of free trade, hasn't worked, that there needs to be a rethink at this point?
Hello.
Mr. Pant?
Hello. Yeah.
Yes, so I was asking you that...
Can you repeat question?
Yes, certainly. Mr. Pant, I was asking you that this entire debate is happening at a time when we are seeing economic growth slow down globally. I'm just wondering whether this raises huge question marks on open borders and free trade, and what the larger implications are for a country like India, where we are opening up our economy to the world, to be able to say that, come, do business with us. What are the larger implications, you think? Is there a rethink on what globalization is and how it should be played out in this context?
Look, whenever any policy action is taken, there are different stakeholders. So the policy which is, no policy will satisfy or will be beneficial to all stakeholders. There will be some loser, there will be some gainer. Now, whenever we plan these policies, as you mentioned about India opening up, we should make sure, like, in the process, we are not leaving any stakeholder behind. Now, as in the earlier panelists have said, and you have also said, look, most of these things are benefiting either the people, those who are at the top of the pyramid, either those who are rich, those who are rich, who are knowledgeable, those who are educated, those who can make use of technology in their day-to-day work life.
Yes.
But ultimately, if this is leaving behind a lot of the people at the bottom of the pyramid, then this starts creating a social unrest. And in fact, what has been one of the major reasons the people opted for Brexit were those who lost their jobs, where they see their wages are going down.
Yes.
because of the immigrants. They are doing the same job at a lower price.
Absolutely. And Shaurya Doval, come in on this, because in India, globalization has indeed meant access to automation, to technologies that keeps us abreast with the rest of the world. We are a labor-intensive economy, and automation could mean job losses in the future. As our reforms open up our economy to the world, do you foresee dissension to it on the grounds of losing valuable jobs to machines, to superior technology? Shaurya Doval, I was asking you about what DK Pant has pointed out, in the sense that losing jobs can be a huge area of friction. Here we are talking about globalization, but what indeed does it mean? Unless it's inclusive, it is going to create problems. And with India, where we are opening up access to superior technology, automation, it could mean future loss of jobs. Do you think that could really make us rethink on how we want to go about the globalization process?
No, actually, I don't think this will have many major implications on India and the globalization process that is underway in India, and even the creation of jobs that will accompany that. See, look at it this way, that globalization involves 169 or whatever number of countries in the world are there. It doesn't involve just one country. And even in case, what we are seeing right now, if at the worst case, is a dismantling of a trade bloc. If this trade bloc does indeed dismantle, none of these countries are saying they do not want to trade with the rest of the world. As a matter of fact, they will be under further pressure and greater pressure and with a lesser bargaining power to trade with bigger countries like India and China. So in some ways, in a very perverse way, this could mean a huge opportunity for a trading opportunity for bigger economies like India and China, because any weakening of the European Union only benefits other trading partners. So, it is not going to lead to any contraction in the global trading. As a matter of fact, it might just further accentuate it. In the short run, there will be implications which will not be very favorable for India. That will be less from the trading side. I think it will be more from the investment side. You see, in the last 3 days, there has been loss of about $3 trillion in the global capital markets. This uncertainty about what's happening with the Brexit vote is going to create a lot of risk aversion as far as global investment is concerned. People are going to wait and watch and see how this uncertainty unfolds itself in the medium to short term.
Sure.
India is right now at the cusp of an economic growth and is waiting for significant global FDI. Now, such a blip at this point in time to India is going to delay, if not derail, India's globalization process.
Fair.
I am worried about that.
Right.
I am not worried about
delay.
this from a medium to long-term perspective,
Sure.
because I think either way, this will will be detrimental to India in any form.
Sure.
But in the short run, I am concerned that, if this is the way the markets are going to remain volatile and lose so much of value, then this is going to create a lot of risk aversion for emerging markets.
Right. So what we seem to be certain about is the volatility in the short term. Frederick, come in on this. I'm just talking about the protectionism that many economies around the world would sort of put the button on. In the US, you see so much of the anti-globalization tide already. There is public opposition to sweeping trade deals like the North American Free Trade Agreement, the proposed 12-nation trade pact, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Both presumptive presidential nominees, Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump, they stand opposed to them. So is politics going to reflect more of the winds of this insular nationalistic ideology, you think, Frederick? Because that's what the fear is, more over and above the immediate volatility that we are going to have to face. And this is, as far as India is concerned, like Shaurya and DK Pant both are pointing out, that this is perhaps just a delay that's going to be something that India, as a growing economy, will have to face, but nothing beyond that. There's not going to be any major derailment. But if you find that insularity now playing out more and more, is there a larger fear?
Yes, I think there should be a larger fear. I think there are two things to this. The first thing is about sort of that we have a fairly stable type of arrangement in the world, in the sense that most governments know that if they are going to raise protectionism very fast and very noticeably against other countries, they're going to shoot themselves in the foot. The economic consequences for them are going to be disastrous. And I think that's really what is keeping the politics of broadly open borders to trade and FDI in check. What we're seeing, however, is a couple of factors, political factors, that have been at play for quite some time now, which is reducing the capacity and the willingness of key governments around the world to actually invest political capital to either improve the system or to make it even more open. That's what we're seeing in the presidential campaign right now in America. That's also what we're seeing in many parts of Europe, where there is a resistance to the idea of doing even more trade agreements. But none of them are really saying, apart from people like Donald Trump, that they want to do really, really drastic things that are going to have serious economic consequences. Most people are more trying to appeal to a growing constituency that are against more trade agreements.
Correct. Shaurya Doval, this pivot at this point in time has moved to identity as well. You cannot disregard that. It's about the global versus the local. It's a debate that has carried on for a while, but the role of the nation state against unified entities that stand for mutual cooperation between member states like the European Union, what is the future for those?
So this is what I had mentioned when I started off. You know, I look at it that there are certain global trends that, you know, like I mentioned, technology, internet, which are questioning the very basis of national identities and are actually in some ways have eroded national identities in light of free flow of people, goods, services, capital, etc. It is but natural that there will be some reaction to such a phenomenon, and you know, and therefore we are seeing this in different parts of the world, a certain resurgence of national identity in light of this globalization. Now, what will be interesting to watch is that how does this debate unfold in itself? Does it lead to the kind of argument that you are making, that, you know, will this resurgence of national identity will unwind the huge benefits globalization has brought to mankind in the last couple of decades? Or will it go in the kind of argument that I'm making, that this resurgence of national identity is a finer, nuanced discussion within the larger globalization debate, and will hopefully, at the end of it, add to the globalization process, but leave it more enriched globalization, because those sections of society that have not been marginal, that have been not benefited from this globalization, will therefore be forced to be bought into the globalization debate, and national governments will have to think that how do they take everybody along as against worrying about just one constituency. So both these questions are out there, and the answer may well lie in either of the extremes or somewhere in the middle.
That's right. A lot is going to depend on the outcome of the Brexit vote as well. What really happens to the UK economy? Does it slip into recession as an outcome of that? And like we also discussed, the possibility does exist that, well, the UK doesn't go out of the European Union. All of it is on the table. A lot is being watched very closely, and we will be keeping a close eye on that space as well. I want to thank our panelists for joining us with their perspectives on this. The debate carries on. Thanks for joining us this evening.